Hello, good people. You are watching Squad Car 37 live. Thank you for joining. We've got a great show tonight. I have a professional jazz musician, expert pianist, a composer, and he has the incredible ability to be able to spontaneously manifest some of the most beautiful music. And if you're not already following him, you should definitely check him out online. He's my friend Caleb, and I'm very excited to welcome him to the show. I'm going to bring him up. Hey, Caleb.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
It is my pleasure.
We have matching microphones, so that's even better.
It is better. So, Caleb, tell us the name of your most recent musical project and what it means to you.
Well, it's so luxuriant is the name of it, and so that means not exactly luxury. It means fruitful or sort of like I don't know, making a lot of something. And so that's part of my idea for this project is that it would just be like this creative flow because sometimes I get kind of stuck, and my goal is to not be stuck. And so anyway, but that's the idea behind it. But what it is here's my piano. I've got some pianos and analog synthesizers behind me that are hard to get out of the way of, and so I do just melodic, improvisational, ambient influenced, but not boring, beautiful music.
And so you actually you have a bit of a discipline that you're going through right now. I mean, the world is in an interesting state right now, and you've taken advantage of that to sort of create sort of a daily workflow. A creative workflow? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the first couple of the initial kind of lockdown was really tough, kind of emotionally, and like I was playing. So I'm a jazz piano player, and so I would play 20 gigs a month, a lot of months, and then that went to like within 4 days, nothing. So first the retirement homes canceled, then all the hotels canceled, and then everything else canceled. And I've been sort of this studio didn't sort of appear out of nothing. It's been kind of an idea evolving in my head that's like, hey, what if a jazz guy takes kind of the interesting harmonies that go into a jazz piece, but sometimes jazz it's like you're changing chords and keys, every two bars. What if you take some of those tensions and ideas and then kind of elongate the whole thing and kind of stretch them out and focus on the melodic part and maybe use some interesting sounds? So that's it. That's what I do. And then because I'm an improviser, so there's the kind of jazz piece, I just kind of set a goal that was like, I'm going to make a video for YouTube every weekday morning as I just get up in the morning and record it. And it could be 1, 2, or 3 takes, but usually by that point, my family's starting to wake up and I have a small house. And so kind of running out of quiet time because recording a piano is just ambient noise is a terrible issue because sound comes out everywhere and you got to turn up the volume so high, especially to get the real kind of delicate sounds I'm trying to get. So I just try to get up every morning and set my alarm for 6:30 and hit snooze maybe a couple times and then come down. And the first times, like I'm such a live player and haven't focused on recording much that it just was so awkward. And I'd set up my camera and everything. But the great part is the more you do something, the more you get comfortable with it. So I'm starting to get comfortable with the workflow and the sort of just falling in love with doing it and loving the sounds, not loving every composition, but loving many of them. And then, so the other part of the plan is to do the sort of work each day and then take the best of those and release sort of periodic albums, so at least several a year. So that was a long answer. That's it.
So from your background, see, many people play an instrument, and some people do it for different reasons, right? Some people pick up an instrument because they want to be able to play some of their favorite songs, and that's winning. Some people play an instrument because they want to create. Some people play an instrument because they want to create and play with other people. How has your jazz background inspired you on the creative side of the things, and how has it set you up for success to do these daily improvs, which are really, like I said in the intro, you're essentially just manifest that morning you've created something that was nothing before. How has your jazz
Yeah.
influence sort of inspired that?
Well, it's funny because after we initially talked, I got thinking about a little bit of that question and was thinking about the ways I think in some ways, the ways it helps is obvious. Like hey, jazz is, I mean, the way jazz works is you play a tune, you play the head of the tune, and that's the tune, and then you improvise over the framework, and then you take turns doing that, and then you play the head again, and the tune's over. So the exercise of spending 4 hours every Friday night in a restaurant is like, being creative, making stuff up, writing, composing music on the spot, like that sort of obviously carries over. And then the piece that's been a little weird and different is you, at least with a jazz tune, often you're improvising within a framework. And for these, you're improvising within a kind of framework, but it's often more of like an initial idea that leads you somewhere, or a chord progression that I give myself, or I try not to always start with the same thing because I don't want all the pieces to sound the same. So sometimes it could be like, one day was like, okay, I'm just gonna start with like 16th notes on my right hand and see. You know, and I'm also, just for whatever reason, interested in the idea of if I have an idea, looking at it from kind of different directions. So it's like I can take a small thing and be like, okay, there's two notes. Okay, and then I can look at it. There's a lot that can be done sometimes with just these 5 notes or these 6 notes. So sometimes it can be that. Sometimes it can be like, okay, here's a melodic idea. It can be a chord idea. It can be a drum beat that I could start with. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I love relating this as, first of all, as a guitar player and as someone who grew up playing with my dad. Some of the first things we would play would be riff-oriented things like blues, for example, 12-bar blues. And so he would show me the rhythm to the blues, and then I would learn that, and then I would play the rhythm, and then he would improvise over that. So he'd play a solo.
Yeah.
And then when he was done exploring over top of that, and part of this process is, here's one of the things, if you don't have the theory, and eventually, you go through and theory becomes a tool to you. But what I found was your ears are your best friends. So when someone is playing something and you're reacting to it or choosing notes to accent it, your ears will tell you if that note is pleasing or not pleasing. And so you try to eliminate the notes that are not pleasing and articulate towards the notes that are pleasing. And so early on through those exercises of just improvising, I started to see a framework in the positions and the intervals,
Yeah.
the spaces between notes. Now, for those listening who aren't musicians, if you have a keyboard or a piano, um, depending on what chords you choose, there's like if you wanted to play in C major, for example, there's a way to kind of visualize which notes would be in that scale. And for the most part, work. Some
Right.
sound better than others,
Right.
right? So with a guitar, it's a little bit more complex. So we have to memorize shapes and scales, and then I can hear something and determine sort of the triad. First the root note, the triad, is it major or minor, and within seconds I can lock into the scale that works with that, and then where those notes are on the fretboard. And so from a guitar player standpoint, what we love about jazz music is, even if it's not our genre of playing, but rock guitar players, when we go into blazing guitar solos, we are improvising over those notes. When you're in a blues band and somebody says, all right, go for it, it's your lead, you are improvising over those notes. So I can absolutely appreciate and love sort of what you're able to do, and your level of complexity of choosing notes and accuracy of notes is
Oh,
brilliant. Is
well, that's
brilliant.
kind of you. Well, and I mean that's yeah, and I do love the improvisational art forms, but you're right. It sort of shows itself in a lot of different ways. Whether you're talking about a lot of rock guitar players and the way they begin to learn, or jazz, which obviously is at a really sort of high level of complexity, or blues, but even some Indian music or something like that, where these are still fundamentally improvisational art forms. So all of that is super inspiring.
Can you would it be okay if I played an example from your YouTube page? I've got two clips that are super cool.
Yeah.
One kind of shows this the combination of your electronic side and the piano side, and how the electronic piece, sort of, you let that go and then you play to that. You're improvising to that, and I think it's super, super cool. So I'll play a little clip, and hopefully everybody can hear this. Here we go. So very cool. So your piano, the synth on that is primarily creating a bit of a percussive element. Can you describe what was going on there?
Yeah. So I'm such a kind of pianist first. It's funny because you meet different musicians, and often they'll have like a real, maybe their sort of bent is towards being an engineer, or they're really into the technical side, and then they'll sort of work out the other sides. And I like to play piano and then kind of stretch myself in all the other ways. So if that's learning to enough recording to be able to at least do this project, and then when it's time to mix and master it, send it to a real engineer, something like that. So it's funny because those drums sound super basic, but I also sometimes like the juxtaposition of something that's real simple with something that's a little bit more complex. So it's not a real problem. But anyway, this is my drum machine that I have. Whoops. Oh yeah, this is good. So basically, I can control there's a tempo, and then across. So it's just part of a Eurorack system that how's that volume? Good.
Yeah, sounds great.
So I can make my kick drum across here. I can take right, so then I can. So and then I can build up banks of these things, and so then evolve them over time and randomize and things. And it's a fairly new piece of gear, so that's the other fun thing about having sort of building out a studio, and then you buy some keyboards and gear and things, and you're like, oh, I figured out just enough to make it work, and I want to use it. And then each day you can explore kind of a new piece, which can also take your improvisations in a different direction a little bit. So, yeah, that's what's going on there. But it's, again, all that stuff you could do in your computer. There's so much of what I do that maybe you could do in your computer, but I just have trouble being inspired by that, because that's the other piece. I mean, if we're going to talk about music, then we have to talk about the piece that's like, okay, what is it that moves me? Music only matters if it moves me emotionally somehow, right? So I've got software pianos, but don't care. I mean, so I use them for little projects or things, but as far as something where I'm really like, okay, this is inspiring, because it is like this. Okay, I have to play something, but then I have to play something next, and if I'm not sort of fundamentally inspired by what I'm hearing, whether it's what I'm playing or what the instrument is giving back to me feedback wise, then I won't get very far. So that's why I've ended up the very expensive route of having all real pianos and piano tuners and analog gear and stuff, because so you can do, I mean, I like Ableton too, but there's something especially about this sort of improvisational thing where you just need the knobs right there, or it doesn't work very well for me.
So, Caleb, it's kind of like you're describing, you have a palette. If you're a painter, you've got favorite colors, right? You've got not only, if you're a really good painter, you've got favorite colors, you've got favorite types of paint, you've got favorite, brands of paint. You get very, very specific. And as a guitar player, I have favorite types of guitars and amps and sounds. And as your ear develops, and when you're first starting out, maybe it's a little more difficult your ears aren't as attuned to some of those differences. But as you start playing over time, I think you become more open to noticing those differences. And I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
And when you were describing before the synth behind you, for those of you who aren't familiar with modular synthesis, it's basically scalable components, that electronic components that you can build is big as you'd like to go, adding different sounds. And is that a fair sort of description?
Yeah, and I would say so some of the early synthesizers were modular. So unlike like this keyboard right here, right? So the whatever Dave Smith decided needed to be in it, he built it in one box, and then you buy it and you get it. But with a modular synth, so even in the early days, the early Moogs, you could build them up in sections. So these giant Moogs that you see, you can buy more of one section or less of another or whatever. And now there's been this whole explosion in sort of a miniaturization of that kind of Moog size, so that you can do it for a relatively reasonable amount of money. So, and I'm trying to like, if I were to offer a tip for someone to be getting into Eurorack, my tip would be begin to figure out what you want out of it, because you can literally do anything. So you can go towards synth voices. I have a friend who's really into like noise, like just crazy noises, and so he has this whole setup that's built around just making everything from weird drones to chaos. I've decided that I want mine to be drums, because that's tactile, and then also ways to affect audio. So maybe a synth voice, but then so you're a guitar player. So I've got this. There's a Eurorack version of the Lo-Fi Junkie, which is actually it was a guitar pedal first, which is sort of a saturation.
Can we hear it an example?
I would have to patch it in.
Oh, that's okay.
And yeah, I mean, so
But basically, saturation, so as some
yeah.
describe, distortion,
Yeah, so
or
it
added
just-
harmonics, or it gives you just a little bit of awesomeness.
yeah, right, exactly. So this, but the fun thing about it is once you get kind of the expense of a rack built, if you're disciplined in a certain way, which is I'm trying to be, there's a really sort of robust world out there of people buying and selling your rack stuff. So you can, oh, I don't like this.
Trade
Sell
it
it.
out.
Yeah, it's so cheap to ship because they're super lightweight. So it's like first.
So we were talking about an aspect of synthesis, or maybe an effect for synthesis before, called the arpeggiator. And many watching may know what an arpeggiator is. I love it. It's really cool. Can you describe what it is theoretically, just music-wise, and then give us a demonstration of what an arpeggiator is?
Right. So if I had to do it on piano, right? So a chord is just say 3 notes, right? An arpeggio is just taking those notes and breaking them up. So if I'm doing it on piano, I gotta play all the notes.
So a chord is simultaneous notes, and an arpeggio is those notes played individually, and an arpeggiator is...
An arpeggiator is, it does it for me. So on my keyboard, if I hold down this chord, so it's, whoops. And then this gets, that gets really cool though, if you add some sort of like delay onto it or something. So if you have,
Nice. Dry.
so if you can kind of get your, and so this is also part of the improvisation process. That's not always the part that happens on camera, right? So I mean, it happens on camera, but I don't put it on YouTube because there can be part of the morning that's spent, okay, let me experiment. Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, that's really cool. And then, so sometimes I can do 2 or 3 or 4, 2 or 3 takes. And, oh, see, now my voice is also running through this.
Cool. Tape delay on the audio, too.
Yeah, it's...
So getting back to improvisation, would you like to give us an example, kind of walk for those who maybe have never improvised before? Can you show us how that might work?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll maybe do it and talk it. So most basically in sort of my thinking in sort of a really, if I just have nowhere else to start, I am going to be thinking in terms, at the very least, of sections or something like that, right? So I'm going to say, am I going to have an intro? Am I just going to jump right in? Am I going to, have, sometimes rather than, sometimes it even helps to even think of like almost like a pop song, like verse, chorus. Here's my verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus kind of thing. And then sometimes it's just free form, free for all. So let's say I'm in G minor again for some reason. And let's say I had my tape delay on. Okay, I'm getting my tempo messed up. So as soon as you have 2 notes, you have a melody. That's all it takes. Okay, let me see, hold on. So there is a way for me to take my voice out of this. Check. Okay, that didn't do it. Tape delay send. Okay. All right, well, you get to hear my voice in the tape delay. Okay, so as soon as you have two notes, that is really hilarious and awful.
It's very creative.
Okay, well, it's very creative. As soon as you have two notes, you have a melody, right? So if they're these or they're these. And maybe if it were wider space like that, kind of dramatic. And you always have this idea of sort of something old, something new, right? So maybe I would do something similar again. Then I decide, oh, it's time for a new chord. And then, and maybe, so I can go a couple different directions at this point, right? I can really change it up. I can say, oh, I need more energy. And I should be showing, I guess, what I'm doing. That was very
Beautiful. It's
rambly, but yes, but yeah, thank you. Also beautiful, and I would say if I have sort of a, I don't know, an overarching goal in my improvisations, it is to be melodic. It is to take you somewhere through, some sort of melody, which is not everybody's goal. I mean, if you watch enough synth players on YouTube, you see that's certainly not everybody's goal. There's a lot of like, hey, look what this synth can do. And I think, like I have this OB6, which sounds glorious, but of the wide world of sounds it can make, there's probably a sort of a little area of them that are the ones I really am that interested in. But it's so good at them that that's what we just have it for that.
As a musician, what sort of, you've been doing this for a minute, what sort of advice would you go back in time and give yourself as sort of a teenage musician?
Well, I mean, everybody wishes that they would practice even more, I guess. I would say one of the things that I did that was good was just to get out and play. That's sort of I think the biggest thing is just play, get with friends, play. I was in high school, I was jam with my buddies, and there's probably cassette tapes of those around at one of our houses still. And then somewhere through, so my degree's in church music actually, and then started playing jazz along the way, which was not my plan, but I was interested in improvising. Oh, this tape delay is still on. Fixed. Okay. That was awesome though. So yeah, play with people. I mean, we would go into Loudoun County and just drive around and pass out CDs. I mean, that's what we would do. We would play jazz. So we would go to every like wedding venue, restaurant, and pass out hundreds of CDs. Now you need a website. Now you need some sort of like way to professionally, if you want to do it. I mean, if you want to gig, I guess that's the thing. Like I'm always saying, like, what's your goal? I mean, you can have an amazing musical life not being a professional musician, and there's some argument for that, right? I mean, it can be stressful to try to like tie your living to your joy of music, you know. But if it's what you want to do, then you better just treat it seriously, I guess. Which means consistently show up day in, day out, make the phone calls, make whatever your genre is, wherever you need to make your connections. And I think that's every path and story. I know so many musicians, and every path is so different, though. So trying to say, hey, here's the path you should take. I don't know.
Depends.
Yeah.
Depends on where you are, who you are, and
Yeah.
what your goals are. Practice more. Okay, well, that's probably a universal. That's probably a universal.
Do some ear training. I don't. Yeah, I mean, love it. I mean, don't forget about that part if you're trying to do all the other stuff. And actually, I would say, there are certain things musically I don't enjoy doing, and the less of those things I do, the better my life is. So sort of figure out, what's the sort of musical core of who I am, and then just go after that. And I've found that to be a lot more satisfying than to try to do a whole bunch of things or take gigs that, I mean, I still take a lot of gigs, and not all of them do I really, really want to do, but there's some I just know that's not worth it.
I wonder if that's part of the experience too, that starting out, you cast a wide net, you do everything, and then from that exercise, you realize what brings you the most happiness and joy.
That's probably a good point. Like I probably wouldn't know that stuff without having done it, without just being like, wow, I stressed out for that gig for 2 weeks and that wasn't worth it. But
well, I'd love to hear you play a little bit more. And on this note, I was kind of curious because we're going through this interesting time. The world is, and it creates an opportunity in any difficult time. I think it creates some real opportunities for us to be creative, to do things outside of the box, to grow. And you often talk about, or you've mentioned before, and I believe this as well, sometimes constraints, especially on a creative standpoint, constraints can actually be, can fuel creativity. Would you agree with that? And how is this current situation sort of that we're all feeling, or just generally, how do constraints create or fuel creativity, if you agree with that?
Well, again, it depends on what, it always goes back to your goals, right? But if part of my goal with this particular project is, hey, I want to be on Apple Music and Spotify, I want music to be seen in this particular world, this genre, then you kind of have to, one constraint is a genre. Like what genre is this? And this sort of indie classical music world is a genre that exists. I didn't make it up. There's a bunch of really great, amazing artists that I've some of them I've met, some of them I've just been inspired by online. So that's part of it. Part of it is, having made decisions about. Some people are hoarders. I'm not. Like I get rid of stuff. So it's sort of like made decisions about, okay, these are the pieces I'm going to work with. And I have enough. Like I have enough of a palette. Speaking of a palette, I've got a reed organ that's off camera and you can't see. It's a sort of like reed organ, analog synth, piano. And one of the things this whole piano, you've been hearing it with leather on it. But I've also got felt that I can put, so this sounded cool.
I
So
was going to ask you
these are
about that.
leather strips
What is
from our
that?
friend Wayne.
Okay, Wayne
So
Groves. Okay,
yeah, that's the one.
awesome, awesome.
So I went into his leather shop, and he gave me these. He gave me a bunch of different kinds of leather to try, and so they hang down there between the. So here's my piano without. So here's a. So that's a little bit strident to me. Most of the time, I have felt that I went into the fabric store and bought and Velcro on the back. So I put Velcro on the back of this deal, whatever that is, and so usually I have the felt hanging down. So that makes it sound like, oh yeah, like this. So if you remember how the leather sounded, I don't know if you were thinking leather, but so you get a lot more harmonics, you get less of the attack, and to me, it's weird because the sound I feel like I'm going for, the sound I hear in my head from my piano, is like this super weird combination of like head in the piano. You can see where these mics are; they're like inches away. So head in the piano with the reverb of a cathedral. So it's like ends of the spectrum. So not like audience position piano. It's like,
Hmm.
you know, this sort of like it's a piano. So anyway, that's the, and you can hear. I actually still have felt here next to leather here. So let's see if we can hear the difference. So here's felt, and then you kind of hear it. The leather. There's a little bit more
Yeah, there's a like
with the
almost
leather.
a percussive
Yeah, yeah,
feel to
precisely.
the leather. You can hear a popping a
Yeah,
little bit more prominent.
yeah. So and I
I've
have,
never heard of that. It's so cool.
yeah. Well, it's definitely not. I didn't invent it. There's a whole world. There's that. What's a Spitfire Audio? I mean, if you're
Hmm.
interested in that
Hmm.
sound, actually there's a plugin. It's Spitfire. They just came out with a new one called Noir or something, that has a bunch of piano felt, and Nils Fromm does that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So, but my goal then is to take these same sounds, and then hopefully I don't sound just like them. Hopefully my jazz influence and all that takes me a different direction, but we're in the same world. So that's that's the
Yeah, I'm a
deal.
big Spitfire audio fan. For
Yeah.
those
So
of you,
yeah,
yeah, I was going to add, for those of you who are into music production and creating, especially if you're looking for orchestral type music, but Spitfire Audio like nails that and then does its own sort of nuance to pianos, to the orchestral sound. Like I just got a new library from them of brass that was recorded in a giant freezer with extra echo and ambience, and it's designed to have the sort of orchestral, beautiful film sort of feel to it,
yeah,
but with a nuance that's different than other libraries, and they're all very playable. For those of you not into this stuff, basically these are professionally recorded, individual, every single note on a piece of brass or a piano, etc., recorded so that you are able to use your keyboard and actually articulate that and play that through your computer. So many film scores, TV scores, etc., use Spitfire audio. And if you're into that, I would check them out online.
yeah, yeah. And the
And
benefit to that is, so the difference between what I'm doing and that sort of scoring word a little bit is, here I do what I do and I capture it, and then then you have an editing kind of deal. So then you want to be a good editor, and okay, take the best moments. Okay, those are an album. This is what it is. But if you're doing the kind of thing you're talking about, it makes a lot of sense actually to work in that world, because then when the director comes back to you and is like, I liked this part, but I just need that melody to go a little bit different direction there, then you just reprogram a few notes. So that's a world I don't work in as much. I again, just figuring out what inspires me, versus what inspires somebody else. So
Yeah, man, really cool. So, I'm going to ask you a question about your influences because I want to dive deeper into just personally into more of those improv greats, improvisers that you listen to. And so, who would be your top three, just first that come to mind, greats in the improv, either jazz or otherwise world that we
yeah.
should consider?
Well, so Keith Jarrett, it was like the real sort of, I don't know. He does, so he's a jazz player, but also does kind of some of the more free form stuff that
Mhm.
might be somewhat influential. Not exactly stylistically, but just as far as one of my real big brilliant introductions into jazz improvisation. And then if you're interested in, if some of the things you've heard me play are of interest, then I would say check out like Olafur Arnold's
Mhm.
or Nils Fromm, like some of those guys. Just it's cool what they're doing.
Olafur Arnold's, I only know from looking at the Spitfire
Yeah,
audio
yeah.
samples.
Listen to his music. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah. He's great, and in this sort of like a minimalist way, where again he just can take a few notes and a simple melody, and sometimes that's so powerful. So he's not a crazy pianist like all over the piano player. There's lots of 8-year-olds on YouTube that can play piano, I feel like, better than I can, because that's just the world we live in. But there aren't a lot of 8-year-olds that have the maturity to like just make a melody that kind of really, really moves. At least that's my experience.
Well, let's see. Still have a few. We have people in the house checking us out. I really appreciate everybody
Hey,
tuning in,
everybody. Yeah, thank you.
and I have the ability to see and respond to comments on both platforms, and Facebook and YouTube. So if any of you have some questions you'd like to ask, or thoughts, or if you're musicians or um, music enthusiasts, or just interested in what kind of microphones we're using, please feel free
Any of
to
that.
chime in.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear from you. And Caleb, you want to play some more? I guess if I was watching, and I am, I'd be like, man, can I hear some more of that awesome music?
Ooh,
And
yeah.
if you're able to react or play with both your synth setup and your piano at the same time, so you're
Okay.
sort of going. I
Yeah,
don't know if
it's
you have the
complicated
ability
here
to.
because I'm also tethered by these headphones, and so I can barely.
We got some wires.
See what we've got going on over here.
Awesome.
All right, so let's pick a new key. Okay, sorry. So this is the part that would not be on the YouTube video. We would take two. All right. Well, that was something.
Awesome. Bravo.
Thanks.
Bravo.
Yeah, that was some weird settings on my synth initially, which is the beauty of an analog synthesizer. And I have been working on sort of making presets and that kind of thing. But I also just love the kind of exercise of trying to listen and then build a sound. So sometimes before I would record a video, I would spend the time just being like, oh, okay, how can I get that sound dialed in just right? Or sometimes just start with an initialized patch, which is just, all knobs straight up, and then start to be like, okay, what kind of sound do I want today? But
That was beautiful.
I did.
I didn't want to interrupt you while you were playing, but asking and you shall receive. We got some great comments and feedback. Caleb is master. Yay, heart. And Aaron Campbell, this is great. I think this is when we were discussing the microphone situation. Aaron says, I vote to call this piece the sinking microphone.
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So Aaron is the guy that mixes and preps this stuff for albums. So he's an engineer.
Oh,
he's a
awesome.
good guy. So but maybe he can hook me up with a better mic stand than Aaron.
Oh, I guess he's referring to your microphone just kind of.
Yeah, I think it was this. Yeah, because
back.
it's so these are great mics, but they're so heavy, and I think I've been fighting with it the entire time.
So we have two other questions, Caleb. So Adam Price, that name looks familiar. He says, Caleb, first of all, that sounded so much like a movie soundscape.
Yeah.
If you're for the layperson just relating to the music, that you can see visuals in your head when you're seeing that. You're feeling emotion. It's telling you how to feel when you don't know how to feel. I love that about instrumental music, especially your music, because it's so emotive in its sound. Anyway, so Adam says, Caleb, do you compose music for TV and movies?
Yeah, of course. So not much so far, but certainly I love I love just sort of visuals with music. So on my YouTube channel, some of the things I do are just the camera pointed at me, and then some of them. I mean, at this point, since I don't have any real movies, I just find like archive footage on the
Pre-Linger
internet.
archives. Yeah, that's a great source.
So
great source.
That's at archive.org or something. Yeah.
If you just Google Pre-Linger archives, you can have all kinds of royalty-free, basically public domain footage. Some of it you're going to wade through a bunch of stuff that's probably not relevant, but every now and then you find a gem.
Oh yeah, it definitely takes some watching to like get to something that's like, okay, and I have a certain kind of feel to my music, and then a certain kind of visual that I feel like, okay, this will work well with. So that's the other thing that's somewhat tricky to me. Like some of this music will go on to say licensing sites, because I think one of the things I struggle with is having such a sort of sense of what I want to do that makes it difficult if somebody wants music that's not that. So at this point, it's just easier just to be like, hey, I'm creating music, use it. But if it was the right project, then I'd do it.
That's awesome. I have another question here from James Price, another name that sounds familiar. When you record the piano, do you use a reel-to-reel?
I don't. So I have. It's on the one hand intriguing to me. On the other hand, though, I'm not obsessed with the recording. I get obsessed with sound, and I want certain kinds of sounds, but it's less important to me how they're and it just, I mean, tape's expensive. You got to tape machine maintenance is expensive. I mean, you can even run into machines reasonably priced occasionally, And then it's like, well, who do I? So if I had a buddy who was like really into it and willing to keep it running, then maybe. But I think I found the right sort of combination of analog gear and mic preamps. Like, I mean, because that's what it's really about. Again, it goes back to inspiration. So if I needed to do that, like there was something fundamentally about that was so inspiring to me that I felt like I made better music, then I would do it absolutely. And I follow some cool Instagram accounts of guys that make, cool stuff with tape, but it's not what I've pursued.
Well, that's awesome. Man, I had so much fun tonight chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for making time and creating some great music on the fly. And for those of you watching who aren't already following you online, let me throw up some of your handles here. So your website, your at is for Facebook and
Everywhere.
Instagram.
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, but I don't do anything on Twitter.
Yeah, you're lucky
everywhere.
to get that handle. Mine, SquadCar37 at SquadCar37 on Facebook is not me, and I guess it's already been taken. So I'm SquadCar37 audio on that platform.
Tape will give you a much better sound. Here's the comment that you can fee. Hey, I'm in then. Sold. I would. See, that was easy. A much better sound. That's all I needed to hear.
That's it. Well, then you come from the let me turn this off. You come from the studio background as well. You've got experience in all kinds of, from the analog to digital to sort of that world. So you've got insights into the audio quality of tape versus the digital side of things, and how tape can add a sound, a saturation, so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, so I used to work at a studio. I was a graphic designer at Sonoluminous, and their specialty is like super high definition audio, but they do everything digitally. But bit rates I don't even understand, and surround sound, and so that's sort of the. It's funny because I share sort of with that world I feel like an obsession with sound, but it's a completely different sound that I'm getting, and so I appreciate that about the tape guys. That I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So, if I had the opportunity, I guess, to record on some tape, and was just that moved by it, I guess I'd have to figure out how to pursue it. So maybe I shouldn't try it.
Well, awesome. I think we've come to the close of the session. If you wanted to give us 30 seconds of just some beautiful, soothing sounds to take us out, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Outro.
And thank you, everyone, for joining. And hopefully, Caleb, I'd love to have you back on the show again in the future if you would be so kind to join us again.
I would love it. I would love it as well. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Good night, all. Have a great Sunday evening.